Each year, councillors are able to review their fee under the Local Government Act, and they voted to take the maximum amount allowable. That makes their annual pay packet $21,805 plus a computer and mobile phone, while the Lord Mayor's now getting just over $85,000. But he says it's not about the money.
The hours that I put in, and I know the hours the councillors put in, they earn every cent of it. And as I said, it's not about earning money, it's about serving the community.
However, unlike in the private sector, there's no superannuation, holiday or sick pay for councillors. Whether or not they deserve a pay rise remains the subject of much debate.
I think they get ample. I think with all their lurks and perks.
I think they deserve a pay rise. I think they do a great job around the community and town.
It's not a big wage for a big responsibility.
Well, if I had the opportunity to actually give myself a pay rise, I would.
Jessica Phillis, NBN News.
It was billed as a possible record season, the Hunter Olive Association estimating more than 1,000 tonnes of fruit would be harvested across the region. Good rains through the second half of last year adding to the hopes.
Everything was exactly what you wanted and we were all smiling. When the rain didn't stop, then that was the smile disappeared quite quickly.
The weather conspiring to bring on two of nature's nasties, the lace bug and then a fungal outbreak ripped through the crop.
By the time we got to March, the fruit that had formed and was getting ripe was starting to rot before our eyes.
The result, just over 500 tonnes, declared good enough to pick, but what did make the grade is top quality.
In some circumstances, we would go onto a grove and to say, no, it's just not worth picking here. Other places would pick and sort through and throw out the bad stuff and keep the good. So what's finally in the barrel is fine, just there's so little of it.
Next month, the growers are bringing in outside help to try to get on top of some of the region's issues, with one of the country's olive gurus visiting for 3 days.
Very few people in the olive industry and the Hunter are experienced olive growers. There was no industry here 15 years ago. So really, we're all beginners.
Penny Evans, NBN News.
Suzanne Pritchard is a self-confessed science nut, and it's infectious. The thrill of the unexpected, like a balloon that doesn't burst when punctured, or liquids that mysteriously morph into works of art.
We've mixed salt with normal water, and then we put food colouring and we put it on the top, and it doesn't mix in.
Toronto Library was turned into a lab for a workshop called You Become the Scientist, and the Year 3 kids from St Joseph's Primary at Killabin Bay certainly embraced the experimental spirit.
Mixing all stuff together and it's making all different colours and get messy.
Kids love science and they're natural scientists, and that's the beauty of it. You're not actually teaching them anything new, you're just telling them what they already are born with is something to be cherished and hung on to.
So, who wants to be a scientist now?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. Sounds interesting.
It's amazing how many times they come up giving me a hug and go, I'm going to be a scientist. Go, yeah, another win. Yeah, one for the planet, yeah.
What really bites is that for every old computer donated to Wesley Uniting Employment for Refurbishment, hundreds are ending up in landfill, and that really is a waste. But while your old gear might not be meeting your needs, there's always someone out there desperately wanting to get online, and that's where this warehouse assembly program comes in.
So over the last couple of 3 years, Wesley have probably donated 3,000 to 3,500 computers, which is a large saving in landfill. So some of the motherboards have components not friendly to the environment, so it's a big saving environmentally.
Each computer, monitor or keyboard is fixed or refreshed by Work for the Dole participants before being passed on to charities and schools who can't afford to buy their own.
The sort of things we teach them, how to put computers together, learning basic Word, basic Excel, which probably 90% of the people come through here can use in trying to find new work.
At least you're doing something useful. That's what I always say about Work for the Dole. You're doing something useful that's going to benefit somebody else.
And making a difference to the environment as well.
As the old saying, one man's trash is another's treasure, and it's just proof these things can be used again and again, and yeah, and like Danny said, just don't throw them out.
Jessica Phyllis, NBN News.
As his teammates recovered from that disappointing trip to the nation's capital, Chris Bailey was busy trying to prove he's ready after a month-long absence due to a hand infection.
It's always tough to watch, you'd much rather be out there. There wasn't much I could do about it, but hopefully I won't have to watch this weekend.
It follows complications from a dislocated finger. Bailey required surgery and a stint in hospital, but reckons he'll be available for the coming match against the Cowboys, one of his last as a Knight given he's bound for Manly next season.
I think it should be pretty much right. I think the body's all right. It's just the finger, so that won't cause too much of a problem. But it's whether I get picked is another concern.
The team to play the Cowboys will be announced tomorrow. Halfback Scott Giro has his hand up for that game too after missing the match in Canberra. And more news on the recruitment of Dragons player Ben Rogers, agreeing to join Newcastle on a 2-year deal starting next season. The 23-year-old, who has also spent time with the Rabbitohs, can cover multiple positions, including lock and 5/8.
It's been a great 18 months for Jade North. Premiership glory along with Socceroo and Olympic duties have seen his international stock soar. While loath to add to the speculation he's leaving, it appears a deal has been reached for the Jets to see him released overseas a year early, with the transfer fee thought to be around $600,000.
It just seems like it may come to fruition for Jade. As of yet, it hasn't been signed off. I hope that it won't play too much of a distraction on his mind, but being the professional that he is, I'm pretty sure it won't.
The coach already has backup plans to try and limit the effects of North's departure, but the representative calendar continues to plague the Jets, with Jason Hoffman and Nidovsky both on national under-20s duty for a week. James Holland has done his fair share for country of late. Socceroo duty and then on standby for the Olympics in China. He's back home and not before time.
I suppose I wasn't really a part of the Olympics, and then I went away with the Socceroos and I didn't really get much game time there, so to get back in front of the home crowd and play was quality.
Arriving back in Australia only hours before the season kicked off on Friday, Holland will be back on a plane in 2 days' time, with Newcastle playing in Perth this weekend.
A mattress, blankets and a pillow. Not much to keep away the chills on a cold winter's night. This large industrial bin at Maitland might be the home of 3 children believed to be aged around 4, 6 and 9. A small bag of possessions was left behind, including pyjamas, some matchbox cars and a comic book. The story has shocked workers from welfare organisation The Samaritans.
We certainly have been seeing more families living in a car or living in an empty building. We do see more of that than we used to, but most parents want the best for their children, and they try hard, and I was a bit surprised by that story.
With increasing rents along with food and fuel price hikes, the number of homeless people is on the rise. Samaritans also believe domestic violence is largely to blame.
There are more children becoming homeless because of the lack of services for families that are breaking down.
Police Police are now trying to find the children who are being described by local retailers as a 4-year-old boy with a shaved head, along with a 6-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl. They were poorly dressed and had been seen over the last 2 weeks. Numerous searches of the neighbourhood have so far failed to find them. The Department of Community Services says that although it cannot confirm that the children were living in the bin, concerns remain that they were reportedly in the area on school days, were not dressed for the winter weather and were without any adult supervision. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News. First, the power stations were on the agenda. Now the state government has its eye on correctional centres, a privatisation of Cessnock and Parklea to be exact. They aim to be more efficient and effective with taxpayers' dollars.
The public sector will continue to be the major supplier of correctional services for the state, and what we want to ensure is that the public sector continues to be competitive, but we are not the sole provider of correctional services.
But the Prison Officers Association is concerned about job losses, pay and conditions, along with the financial impact on communities such as Cessnock.
We need this to be looked at in the whole day of light and make sure we get the best outcome, the best security for our community, and make sure it doesn't impact on our economy.
Cessnock Jail already caters for 450 offenders, but the government had promised to increase capacity by another 250 beds at a cost of $65 million.
The 250 bed expansion will go ahead and is still on the books. The money's there in the budget for that to go ahead, and that will occur.
Hunter Correctional Services staff are expected to join any future industrial action. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
In the 2.5 weeks that the centre was closed, 5 local centres took on our children and our staff, and we managed to place about 50% of our children at other centres.
In order to judge the best wines our region has to offer, $800,000 worth will be smelt, sipped and then spat out. The Valley's been blessed with great vintages in recent years and the quality hasn't gone unnoticed.
The 08 whites look very good, surprisingly, because it was a very wet vintage, as everyone knows. But the quality of the Semillons, the Verdelho and the Chardonnay was excellent.
Dry conditions have slightly reduced the number of entries to 840, and judging them won't be easy, says leading industry expert Matthew Jukes. He's travelled from the UK to be on the wine show's judging panel, consisting mainly of journalists and wine growers.
But you've just got to keep sort of applying yourself to give every single wine the best chance it can, because after all, every wine's been sort of made lovingly by the winemaker and taken, in the case of the Reds, 2 years to put together.
So when you're judging wine, you obviously look at colour, you look at the aroma and the nose, but most of all the palate. So it's the entry, the middle, how it sits on the tongue, the finish and the after palate.
34 classes are being judged and awards for the best drops will be presented on Thursday night. Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
Thunderbirds are go. Just ask the kids at Glendale Primary School. For the past 3 months, they've been working on the speed machine they'll use in tomorrow's Billy Cart Showdown at Sydney's Eastern Creek Raceway. The initiative is designed to teach kids about road safety, vehicle technology and the environment.
Mostly in the science and technology area, the whole idea of designing and making a pushcart to a set of specifications.
Over at Callaghan College at Wallsend, the Year 8 students have built 2 carts.
The best part would probably be the testing, because you actually get to ride in it and see the finished product.
It may be a couple of years until they're able to get their driver's licence, but they do say practice makes perfect.
There'll be an endurance event, sprinting, a road safety one where they'll get demerit points for every infringement they have.
However, it might be a good thing these primary school kids won't be on our roads for a while.
Not to go too fast and turn and then crash into other people.
Make sure you have a good brake because, as some of us have known, the flag poles aren't very strong.
Lucky our news cameramen are. Jessica Phyllis, NBN News.
There was bound to be repercussions from that loss in Canberra, and today they came.
It was disappointment, and it's the first, sort of major disappointment we've had for quite a while. So we've got to show that we can handle that and fight back.
It'll be without Chris Houston though. The back rower dropped for the weekend match, along with backs Cooper Vuna and Aku Uate. Matt Hilda is at lock with Steve Simpson in the back row, but given he's nursing a neck injury, that could yet change before kick-off on Saturday night. Scott Giroux is back to partner Jared Mullen in the halves, while Wes Nguama is set to make his return on the wing, with Adam McDougall back from suspension to make it an experienced lineup.
It's a huge night at EAS this Saturday night for us. We need to get back on the horse pretty quickly.
Manly-bound back Chris Bailey is set to make his return from injury from the bench, while his replacement next year, Ben Rogers, should add plenty across the park when he arrives.
He's got a bit of flair about him. He backs himself. I think Newcastle Knights fans will really enjoy his skills.
The Gold Coast will enjoy those of Matt White from next season. After 6 seasons at Newcastle but limited top-grade game time, White has agreed to terms to join the Titans on a 12-month deal.
Well, I've spoken to the CEO on that up there and they're pretty happy with the way I've been playing the few first-grade games I got, so hopefully I can go up there and do a good job for them.
Jim Callanan, NBN News. A brilliant day, but Richie Gallatin was having anything but. The Gosford golfer went into the day in a share of the lead for the East Coast swing. A finish far from what he'd planned on though, 4 over and well out of the top placings.
No, one to forget today. Just a scrappy finish in the end, bogeying 4 of the last 5. Not a nice taste.
Given he can drop his worst round, he's already looking towards the final 2-day event at Morisset, which will decide the series.
Morisset's a course I play really well at. I've got the course record there. I've always played well there as a kid growing up. I'm looking forward to going back there again.
The day after that, the rookie pro is off to Indonesia to contest the Asian Tour. Ken Druce had never teed it up at Charlestown before today, but began a narrow leader of the series. He had to settle for a 3 over 75.
A please explain was directed to Councillor Michael Osborne last night as his colleagues sought to clarify information he passed on to the Independent Commission Against Corruption.
Any allegations of impropriety or corrupt conduct that come before us, we are obliged to pass them on to ICAC.
The Greens mayoral candidate and 2 other councillors have referred an email by a journalist to the ICAC.
I received an email from a reporter at the Newcastle Post which raised a number of allegations about a person associated with the Lord Mayor's office.
It's alleged that person met with a representative of the Post newspaper who then instructed a journalist that they were to support John Tate and not include 5 other councillors in the newspaper.
Specifically that they would be supporting one candidate to the exclusion of all others. And I guess that is a problem for democracy.
Allegations are allegations, should be seen against the backdrop of an election in a few weeks, and I think that's what's fostering all this. The motivation of the person that's sending the emails around is something that needs to be asked of that person.
The general manager of the Post newspaper, Nikki Constantine, today told NBN News that there was no truth in the allegations and no proof. She said over the last 8 weeks they've covered all mayoral candidates in the paper. She also added that the journalist Ian Calderwood, who has since resigned over the matter, was a disgruntled employee. Speaking publicly for the first time, Mr Calderwood, a journalist with 40 years' experience, said, "I have told the truth. I have adhered to the journalist's code of ethics." A spokesperson for the ICAC said they can't confirm or deny they'll be investigating the allegations.
I've been in touch with ICAC and I've assured them that I'm happy to work with them.
Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Changes in the modern workplace are forcing employers to rethink how they can attract and retain good staff. By replacing award salaries and changing working conditions under a new workplace agreement, Port Stephens Council hopes its employees are here to stay.
And we're in a competitive marketplace and we're needing to attract people to work here.
Starting next month, 500 council employees will receive a 12% pay rise over 3 years and 12 weeks paid parental leave. But there's also a guarantee for those seeking adventure.
That if they want to go and travel, but the job's here when you come back.
Aiming to become an employer of choice, the council is also paying employees to volunteer 2 days a year in community-based initiatives. But around 25% of council workers didn't vote for the agreement because they don't want to be paid fortnightly.
Managing change, and obviously the change in the way that you deal with your money that you get from weekly to fortnightly is a big issue.
Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
This corner near one of Newcastle's busiest intersections is undergoing some remediation works to cater for an expected 1,500 new plots. The site was purchased from Newcastle Council for the rapidly expanding lawn cemetery.
Instead of there being a hollow that collects water when it rains, the lawn cemetery will be flattened and drained properly.
That's an ongoing battle at the cemetery, with the area plagued by a high water table and earthquake damage.
Some parts of the cemetery can be quite badly affected by that depending on the weather.
In April, the cemetery passed 86,000 burials. More than 1,800 of those are Smiths or Joneses. The Cemetery Trust plans to be around for at least another 10 to 20 years, and then there will still be room for cremations.
We're looking at generating a future income so that when the cemetery eventually closes to burials, it'll still have an income to be able to maintain itself.
The state government is currently reviewing the future of cemeteries, including looking at what space is left in New South Wales and issues like burial tenures.
From our point of view, we just need to wait and see what the government makes of those submissions and if there are changes that impact on how we use the cemetery.
Penny Evans, NBN News. Underneath Australia's surface lies some of the hottest rocks in the world, capable of generating relatively emission-free power when water is pumped deep down into the ground and harvested as steam. That's something the federal government is keen to tap into as its green energy deadline looms, today offering $50 million to heat up the sector.
It's very difficult to attract investors to invest in drilling part of geothermal energy production, and this sort of funding definitely would boost a lot the sector in general.
The University of Newcastle's Priority Research Centre for Energy has developed a mini geothermal plant that in a life-size model would have just 40% of the footprint of a coal-fired plant. While it's only been operating for a month, tests so far are positive, with plans to develop it into a mobile demonstration plant that would be tested in several hotspots, including the Upper Hunter.
The pilot scale plant would be hopefully up and running by the end of next year.
The technology is already being widely used overseas, and the professor is confident Australia's hot rocks could be supplying our homes with renewable power within the decade.
Provided that you basically select a reasonably good location in terms of closeness to the grid and basically consumers, then the cost would be on par with coal-fired power plants.
Penny Evans, NBN News.
A final run at home this morning before the long trip to Perth and another chance for Jets players to push for a place in the first 11. Edmundo Zura continues to get used to life in the A-League, but the coach hasn't decided whether he'll start against the Glory.
A couple of times he's still not sure when to run and where to run in relation to what we do, and that's just going to take a little bit of time.
One player who'll definitely be in the run-on side is captain Jade North, possibly at the expense of young gun Ben Kantarovski. North's ongoing contract negotiations are clearly frustrating for the club, but apparently not for the player.
Nothing has transpired. There has been no progress in relation to that. So Jade North, for all intents and purposes, is a Newcastle Jets player.
I think the media's distracting him, but I think he's fine.
Joel Griffith sent a scare through the ranks when he pulled out of training early with neck spasms, but he's been cleared to play. Jasper Hawkinson won't make the trip, but believes he'll be fit to face Melbourne in round 3. The rest of the team is looking to rediscover last season's winning form after that last-minute draw with the Mariners.
And after the game, the spirit was really high. We thought that we could have won. Sort of upset we didn't get the 3 points.
The Jets have another session in Perth tomorrow before facing the Glory on Friday. Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
It'll be another test, and I'll be interested to see how high I'll go. But it's not all about myself. You know, this is about a team, and this is about a club that's fortunately has given me a lifeline, an opportunity. Step by step, and there's been a few ticks in the boxes, and this is another one today.
Local rallying from the Hunter region against the privatisation of the state's electricity assets is far from over. That's the word from Trades Hall Gary Kennedy, who calls the Auditor-General's report a whitewash.
It is very interesting that in the first line of his conclusions he says this is not an audit. So it's not an audit from the Auditor-General's Department. Well, what exactly is this report? We say a whitewash.
He says the terms of reference given to the Auditor-General were so restrictive they didn't allow him to comment on the merit of the overall proposal.
Well, he had to, because of time constraints, he had to use a private company called Lexicon Partners who specialise in selling off public assets. That's what they do to make a profit. So they were the advisors to the Auditor-General.
It was about maximising the sale price if it proceeds, and it's clear that that's the government's intention.
Member for Lake Macquarie Greg Piper says the final decision should be about keeping promises to the community.
There's been a breach of faith with the New South Wales public. Sometimes, as he says, you do have to make tough decisions, but sometimes you also have to stand by your word. And the word of the Premier and the government before they were elected was that they would not privatise New South Wales power.
Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
Residents of Broke say it took 2 years for Sydney Gas to address a public meeting, and last night their questions were finally answered.
People were quite angry, there was a lot of venting, and I think that the simple message was that people were anti-Sydney Gas.
The Gas Explorer will recommission 2 old wells at Broke to carry out testing. They also plan to build 7 other wells in the area. And if successful, they say the coal seam methane gas will be used for power generation, and it's a greener alternative to burning coal in power stations.
As we know in the Hunter Valley, there is a lot of coal, and the coal around here actually has a lot of gas in it, so we're quite hopeful, but we do need to see that it flows.
Residents want more consultation and are particularly worried about water table contamination, along with other environmental issues.
The protection of the Wollombi Brook and the environment, the tranquil side of our valley needs to be preserved, and we are concerned also about the impact that this might have on land values.
But Sydney Gas says it will hire an independent environmental assessor to ease public angst.
We'll work with them to choose an expert, and then we will pay for the report and the work to be done.
Jane Goldsmith, NBN News. It was a difficult sight for Vicky Barry. Comforted by a friend, she returned home this morning to survey the damage. The steel-framed hardy plank and iron house was destroyed in the fire, but Vicky was still upbeat, believing she's lucky to be alive.
The smoke alarm, I think, saved my life. I heard the smoke alarm, got up, and the room was full of smoke, and just the ferocity of it. If I'd been a few minutes later, I wouldn't have been here.
With the home ablaze, she quickly grabbed an important possession and fled.
Yes, my handbag. No one would ever go anywhere without their handbag.
And on top of losing almost everything in the fire, she had to break the news to her son, who is currently away on holidays. He owns the house. Fire investigators say that due to the burn pattern, it's likely the blaze ignited in the lounge room near the fireplace.
They think that it might have been a spark from the combustion fire. I put a piece of wood on and perhaps a spark flew out.
Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
It might be a long road from Brisbane to Sydney, but it's an even longer one to recovery for people fighting drug addiction. That's why Cassie Paris Newsom's making that journey, determined to reduce the number of young Australians taking drugs.
My mother passed away from a drug overdose when I was 8, so I've always wanted to help young people in Australia make the right decisions when it comes to drugs.
The Glen Innes woman is behind the What About Life campaign, a series of confronting drug videos she's showing high school students to give them the cold hard facts about addiction. Along the way, she's also raising money for the Ted Knopf Foundation.
It's really fulfilling to think that maybe I have changed just one life, if not hundreds and thousands. So I'm really overwhelmed with the support of the communities that we've been receiving as well.
Almost half of the 1,200-kilometre trip has been on horseback, and she's had to keep well off the road. But it's a habit that's had a less than impressive impact on her driving skills.
I've hit a keep left sign in the vehicle, and just funny things like that have happened, but things that will all be good memories.
She and her horses, as well as family friend Ace, can't wait for a grand finale. They're due to arrive in Sydney next Wednesday. Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
With the Knights fighting for a place in the top 8, injuries to key players couldn't have come at a worse time. But in a huge boost, Origin forward Steve Simpson is making a rapid recovery from a neck injury suffered in that loss to the Raiders.
Still a little bit tender from that, but I see the doctor tomorrow about 10:30, and yeah, it's feeling all right at the moment, so I'm pretty confident of playing.
Fellow forward Danny Wicks has been in the firing line this week, wearing most of the blame for the team's poor performance.
He's a pretty strong-willed boy. I've chatted to him about it, been on the end of it myself, so I know what it's like, and I think he's got it pretty well covered.
Brian Smith says the Knights have worked hard to fix their defensive problems and they deserve another chance.
I guess you just find out who's with you and who's not at this time of year as well.
Their opponents, the Cowboys, are locked in a battle for the wooden spoon, but Smith isn't banking on his side racking up a cricket score.
But if you start thinking for and against before you start thinking win, you get your backside smacked very quickly.
Mitchell Hughes, NBN News. It's taken Central 20 years just to get back into the semis, so clearly history's against them.
To get into a grand final, it's probably somewhere around, I think, 1948, and to actually win a grand final, it's the 1920s. So, yeah, there's a fair bit of history there.
The coach believes his underrated forwards have turned around the club's fortunes, guided by halves Scott Briggs and Chad Solman.
What we've been lacking over the years is a bit of direction around the park, and this year we've found it, so the halves have been very important.
Their opponents, the Goannas, are desperate to meet the Rosellas on the big stage after being thumped in the major semi.
It'd be nice to have another go at them. We've been close most of the year up until last week.
The Goannas will retire the number 13 jersey for the rest of the season out of respect for long-serving forward Lance Leonard, who suffered a frightening facial injury on Sunday.
The boys are obviously disappointed, and to lose a bloke like him for such an important back end of the year it's hard to swallow.
Kick-off is at 3 o'clock. Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
Behind every good man is a great woman, or so the saying goes, and there was no shortage of the fairer sex in the Crusader Lounge today.
It was only 3 weeks ago we sent the invites out and we thought, 100 may be a realistic number. Sell-out crowd 250, couldn't ask for more.
The partners of players and staff mingled with sponsors, sports stars and supporters as the Knights applauded the feminine contribution to rugby league.
We've got more and more women coming to our game, and it was just some support and recognition and a bit of fun for them all to join in and feel part of the club.
It was a strictly girls-only affair, and some things only a woman would understand. And while the men might take or leave the champers and cupcakes, you get the feeling there'll be certain aspects of the luncheon they'll be disappointed to have missed out on. Jessica Phillis, NBN News.
This was the horrific scene at Tingara Heights where 2 young lives were cut short, including the best friend of the driver. After travelling at high speeds, the Commodore struck a power pole, the force splitting the car in 2. Today, Judge Ralph Coulihan sentenced the 18-year-old driver, telling the court it is difficult to know what more Parliament can do to discourage people such as this offender. TV is saturated with ads which point out the dangers on our roads. He added these offences are serious. Young people are failing to heed warnings. These offences did involve a complete abandonment of responsibility. The young woman who was in the back seat of the car suffered a brain injury and multiple fractures. She was one of many who had given victim impact statements. Mr. Coulihan said, "I have taken them into account. What they do is provide an insight of the trauma, pain and loss of the victims and families." Initially, the 18-year-old, who was 16 and on his L plates at the time of the crash, as well as being under the influence of alcohol, denied he was behind the wheel, but later pleaded guilty. He recognised that the delay in admitting guilt caused more distress to families. The judge explained the sentence must discourage others from driving in a similar manner. He will now serve time in a juvenile facility until he turns 21 and is due for parole in November 2012. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
A study of the Hunter Business Chamber's proposal to modify the existing Hunter diesel rail cars into a light rail option between Hamilton and Newcastle was completed in September last year. After sitting on the results for 11 months, this is what the Coordinator General, David Richmond, had to say.
It's taken this long because the government wanted to think very seriously about it.
The state government rejected the proposal on the basis that, even with modified brakes, the Hunter rail cars are too heavy to stop safely, that there would be increased travelling times between Hamilton and Newcastle stations, and that the Hunter rail car cannot operate at 15 kilometres an hour over a sustained period of time.
We've lobbied extremely hard for the results of that study to be released to us. Obviously very disappointed that it's taken such a long time. It's certainly not how private enterprise works.
The Hunter Business Chamber is also concerned by the announcement of a new task force established to drive investment for the city. The Chamber fears local businesses won't be consulted. As for what the task force will achieve,
I would expect that the task force will come up with a strategy which sets in place a program of activity which will go well into the future so that people can see some action.
Lucy Wilson, NBN News. The famous moment when sailors were winched to safety from the Pasha Bulker was carefully orchestrated by the Westpac Rescue Helicopter and Newcastle City Council lifeguards. Today was a chance to simulate the rescue, but with a new twist. What if the winching cables had broken and water rescues were needed?
We're utilising the skills of the lifeguards with their jet ski, and we're introducing what we believe is a far more efficient capability of rescuing someone, particularly if they're on the rocks or in the whitewater.
The ocean training involved dropping 2 rescue crewmen from the chopper into the ocean and then taking them to safety by jet skis. The devastating effects of last year's storm have brought the rescue crews closer together, learning to maximise each other's skills and strengths.
I mean, we've always said that the helicopter service is only one link in a very big chain, and that particular day just went to show how well all the emergency services work together.
The annual event is also a signal that Newcastle beaches will be patrolled by lifeguards from next Monday. Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
Steve Simpson's pain in the neck only added to the night's woes today, with the withdrawal of Corey Patterson, a body blow the club didn't need. Their loss has earned Chris Houston a reprieve only days after being dropped, while Cameron Serraldo also comes into the squad, with Mark Defua remaining as 18th man. It's been a foot injury that's floored Wes Nguama of late, but he's passed all the fitness tests required to return.
I feel confident, stepping off both feet and did all the speed work today.
Given the scrutiny Denny Wicks has copped, the team has also closed ranks for a game they simply must win.
Everyone gets criticised, we've sort of had a laugh about it, and we've just sort of put that behind us. Doesn't really matter, and just concentrate on this week.
After missing that match in Canberra, Scott Giroux returns to the halves to play a Cowboys team trying to avoid the wooden spoon, and once again led by Jonathan Thurston.
They got nothing to lose, so they're going to throw everything at us, and we've got to be prepared for that. They could do anything, chip kicks, you name it. So we've got to just be ready and just cover all bases.
Jim Callanan, NBN News. By rights, come Sunday afternoon, Jason Reid should have 2 state motocross titles on his home track at Cessnock and a resume strong enough to lock in both potential sponsors and a factory team deal to ride next year.
We are negotiating, pretty seriously about it, and you'll have to wait and see for next year.
Already talking like a pro, it'd sure beat concreting as the 16-year-old eyes a life built on the back of a bike, something his cousin Chad has famously done, winning world titles and millions of dollars a year.
I don't want people saying, oh, you're only good because you're Chad Reid's cousin. I want to make my own footsteps. He's made it a little easier for me, but, I just want to put a point to everyone. I've done this all by myself.
Racing on the remodelled track begins tomorrow. It's on Sunday that the Australian and Oceania duathlon titles will be run and won in Newcastle. The grounding of the Pasha Bolka and associated weather saw the event cancelled last year, making this event highly anticipated by organisers to say the least. A number of international competitors are in the field, while Central Coaster Chris Dimitriev is one of the best local chances.
When receiving the large established exporter award, the sales and marketing manager of Diwidag Systems International, Mark Philpott, grabbed most of the room's attention. The company manufactures products for the mining and civil construction industries, but is forced to send it to Sydney before distributing it to 16 countries around the world.
If we have to pay $100 a tonne to get freight to and from Sydney, and it's $25 a tonne to get it to and from Newcastle port, that makes us less competitive on the export battlefield.
Many exporters are keen to see the former BHP Steelworks site converted into a container terminal, and tenders were called to redevelop the site earlier this year. In response to Mr Philpott's comment, the Newcastle Port Corporation said it's working on its wharf infrastructure. Other businesses recognised for their success in the global market were disinfectant company Whiteley Corporation, tailor-made fish farms, shock absorber manufacturer Powerdown Australia and winery Yarraman Estate. Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
When he left for Perth, Jade North thought he was only days away from a big transfer deal overseas. Upon his return home, the picture was clearer.
It looks like I'm going to be staying here and, that's all good. I'm happy to play the season out.
But if his team continues to finish games off like this, it's going to be hard on the heart. The last kick leveller even surprising North.
I just thought, what am I doing up here and what am I doing scoring?
To be fair, Newcastle should never have been a goal down that deep into the game in the first place. Giving up a one-goal lead, Newcastle regained it after half-time care of Song, who got a little help from the home side. Perth's answer, far more clinical. It was a third goal that really took the wind out of Newcastle as Perth looked to have sewn up all 3 competition points. And while North's saviour spoiled Glory's night, the Jets coach wasn't exactly doing backflips either.
In injury time and you get out with a draw, you should be feeling, lucky, but I'm not feeling lucky at all. I'm feeling that the game should have been dead and buried well and truly prior to that.
Proving just how serious she is about change at the top, Councillor Helen O'Neill isn't running for re-election in Ward 2. It's Lord Mayor or nothing. Heavily involved in sport, Miss O'Neill believes she's the perfect coach for council starting 12.
Everyone brings their strengths along and you need to work on them, and perhaps if there's any weaknesses, certainly address them, and without harmony around the chamber, we can go nowhere.
Her priorities include an integrated public transport system and encouraging more investment in the city to help alleviate rising infrastructure costs. The first step involves removing the stigma often associated with developers.
We need to say to them, what can you give back to the community if we certainly put out the welcome mat for you to come into the community.
The Greens' 4 candidates also launched their campaigns this morning, hoping to make Newcastle a leader in the fight against climate change.
Most of our infrastructure will be impacted by climate change, whether it's the drainage system or our foreshore or suburbs such as Maryville and Stockton.
Lord Mayor hopeful Michael Osborne says his party opposes the expansion of Newcastle's coal exporting facilities and the Tilligra Dam in favour of environmentally friendly initiatives.
People have been saying it's time for change, that the current leadership has been there way too long, that we need generational change and we need leaders with new ideas.
Mitchell Hughes, NBN News. Like Andrew Johns and Paul Harrigan before him, Danny Medeiros has become another of Newcastle's greatest players to have his career at the club ended by injury. With specialists tonight, Medeiros will talk about his playing future tomorrow, but the one-team man is almost certain to be robbed of a fitting football farewell.
You know, even though Bedsy doesn't get the opportunity to play his last game at home, he's achieved everything there is to achieve in the game, and at the end of the day it's only one game, and he had nothing left to prove anyway, so he's a champion and always will be.
The lure of a grand final finish for Lance Leonard was enough to see him run out for Cessnock in Newcastle Rugby League's preliminary final today, despite suffering a fractured cheekbone last week. After a nervous start from both sides, Cessnock backed the pace of the league's leading try scorer Chris Pine, and with good reason. The winger running it down for the first points. Taking an 18-0 lead at the break, the Goannas booked their grand final berth with a try straight after half-time.
I've been training with Lee Troop, the Olympic marathoner, in Geelong, and running really well, so I thought I may as well use my strength and try and get a big gap, and that worked out well.